family. They quit practicing polygamy 120 years ago.
The journey starts amidst the stillness of a family already broken. A family whose unity was offered to millions of viewers, but whose reality was nothing but utter chaos. For years, Christine held the burden of questions, suspicions, and silent observations that no one else had the courage to say. She noticed the way Robyn clung to control, the way money seemed to pass through her fingers, and the rest of them pinched pennies to get by, barely able to stretch each dollar. And whereas others were willing to take at face value the deception Robyn carefully maintained, Christine's gut told her that behind the tears and shaking voice, something sinister lurked. It wasn't a single moment that got Christine started down the path of discovering what was real. It was hundreds of little ones, a bill that never quite tallied, a surprise new car that showed up out of nowhere, a credit card the other people in the family were oblivious to. All of these little things individually seemed insignificant, but as soon as Christine started stringing them together, a pattern emerged. And that was the pattern that spoke a tale far from the one Robyn wanted anyone to hear. Christine never attempted to ruin Robyn. That was not her way, but she did believe in equity, in integrity, in the kind of trust that a family was built upon. And with each month, with each subdued gazing, she saw that Robyn had been weaving an illusion so complex and so deliberately constructed that even Cody himself couldn't penetrate it. Robyn wept in the right spots. She pretended to be victimized when the cameras were on, and she positioned herself as the one fighting the hardest, the one bearing the heaviest burdens. But Christine knew better. The deception started to fall apart in the most unexpected of places. A simple check on papers that Christine uncovered while going through family records. It was nothing, she first thought. Just old documents scattered in where they didn't belong. But the more she saw, the more she knew what she was looking at. Bank statements in Robyn's name, transactions that didn't fit the family budget, deposits far larger than anything that should have been possible. Christine felt her stomach tighten as she scanned the numbers. They weren't just large, they were staggering $12 million. Secretly stashed away in accounts Robyn had gone to great lengths to keep hidden from everyone else. It wasn't savings, it wasn't good planning, it was secrecy. Secrecy on an enormous scale. Christine's heart pounded as she realized Robyn wasn't keeping money hidden. She was keeping a whole fortune hidden. The pain of the betrayal hit her harder than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't jealousy, or one wife receiving more than another. This was deceit. It was the manipulation of trust within a family already bruised by years of hardship. Christine recalled the night's groceries needed to be stretched, when bills introduced tension into every dialogue, when Cody claimed there was not enough to share. And meanwhile, the whole time, Robyn had been sitting on millions she never confessed to. Millions she held on to while the rest of them made sacrifices. Christine did not have to say anything. She could have turned and walked away, taking the knowledge with her, allowing Robyn to keep spinning her illusion for the world. But that wasn't who she was. Silence would have been complicity in the lie, and Christine was not willing to bear that. She knew the truth needed to be told. Regardless of the price, her initial foray into confronting Robyn ended in tears, as anticipated. Robyn's face contorted, her voice trembled, and she pleaded for mercy. "It is not what you think," she whispered, holding tissues to her face as if they would insulate her from the tragedy of her own dishonesty. But Christine wasn't swayed this time. She had viewed the documents, the transfers, the figures that did not lie. Robyn's tears were just another tool in her arsenal of deception. Cody's response was more complex. He wanted to believe Robyn. He always wanted to believe Robyn, but Christine had too much proof. The papers were there, the stories were there, the money was there. And at that moment, not even Cody could deny it. His silence was louder than any lie he might have uttered. The family continued to break apart as the truth started to spill out. Janelle, normally measured and reserved, was shocked. Meri, typically icy and detached, could not conceal her outrage. The facade of harmony that Robyn had worked so hard to create was falling piece by piece, and there was nothing to be done about it. Christine understood the next step would not be an easy one. Revealing the truth to the family was one thing, revealing it to the world was another. But she understood also that there was no turning back. The evidence was too compelling, the deception too entrenched, and the moment the world knew what Robyn had been keeping from them, the facade she had constructed would be destroyed once and for all. The courtroom was the platform where this tale reached its climax. Lawyers presented the evidence. Judges read through the documents, and Christine's voice bore the burden of years of silence ended. Robyn sat at the table, her poise disintegrating as each piece of evidence came out. Her tears, which once had been capable of moving hearts, fell in vain this time. The truth was louder, stronger, irrefutable. Christine's testimony was firm, unshakable. She spoke not with spite, but with passion. "This isn't about me," she said to the court. "This isn't about anger or jealousy. This is about truth. And the truth is, Robyn has been concealing millions while the rest of us fought to make ends meet." The news was shocking. The deception Robyn had lived with, the artfully constructed guise of sacrifice and dedication, crumbled in the face of $12 million. The ruling was unequivocal. Robyn's secret was no longer in her custody. And when the gavel came down, Christine felt the burden lift from her shoulders. She had accomplished what she intended to do. She had shattered the illusion. And although the family would never be the same, although the wounds of betrayal would remain, the truth had at last been free. This was just the start of the backlash. The world was about to discover the extent of Robyn's lies. Cameras that had once fawned over her would now record her ruin, and the $12 million reality would resound louder than any fantasy she had ever attempted to construct. The repercussions of Christine's revelation didn't end on the courtroom steps when the truth about the secret $12 million became public. The entire world of the family started to turn around, as if the ground was yanked out from under them. Robyn had positioned herself for years as the poor wife, the one carrying the weight of money worries, the one always sacrificing for the benefit of Cody and the kids. But now, that image had been broken, and the public was left gawking at the unfiltered, unvarnished truth. Christine had never enjoyed the limelight. She didn't wake up one day and declare that she wanted the world to hear about Robyn's secret wealth. What she wanted was fairness, integrity, and responsibility. But once the cameras picked up the news, it could not be kept under wraps. Social media went haywire overnight. Every doorway, every fan site, every critic who had long guessed that something was amiss about Robyn now had evidence. Court document, screenshots, reproductions of financial reports, analysis breaking down every avenue. It all went viral. Christine spent an evening sitting in her living room, scrolling through her phone, still trying to comprehend how rapidly the story had gained a life of its own. Comment by comment poured in, the majority of them complimenting her on her courage. Finally, someone spoke truth. Christine was always right. Robyn's deceit is over. But with the compliments were others, individuals who called Christine vindictive, who made her family business public in order to gain attention. Those hurt, but she knew those were not the majority. Deeper down, Christine knew something straightforward. The truth does not require everyone to believe it. It only had to be irrefutable, and that is what the $12 million was, irrefutable evidence. For Robyn, though, the destruction was too much. Her tears, once her strongest protector, now cascaded into an abyss where nobody cared. Even Cody, who had stood up for her until the end, seemed quieter these days, less convinced of the woman he had placed over the rest. Behind closed doors, their talks became more strained, more desperate. Robyn would beg, protesting the money wasn't what it seemed, that she had motives, that it wasn't lying but guard. Guard for whom? That was the question nobody could avoid. The other two wives, Janelle and Meri were in a storm they had not invited, but could not leave. Years they had played second fiddle, each attempting to stake out their own niche in a family, in which Cody's attention was limited and his favoritism plain. They saw now in black and white the extent to which Robyn had traveled to maintain her own stability at the cost of keeping them in the dark. The resentment that had quietly brewed over the years came to a boil. For Janelle, it was the lying. For Meri, it was betrayal over years of estrangement. Neither would be able to look at Robyn the same again. Christine thought often about the irony. She had not set out to break anyone up, least of all the father of her kids. But as she reflected back on the years of pinched budgets, over every holiday she fretted whether the children would get enough. Over every argument about rent and utilities, she saw the meanness of what Robyn had done. All that hardship had been for naught. The nights lying awake, the arguments, the sacrifices. These could have been mitigated, if only Robyn had been truthful. Public reaction widened the chasm. Fans started piecing together timelines, referencing scenes on the show where Robyn had wept about being broke, where she had portrayed herself as being in debt. People replayed those scenes now with new eyes, examining every tear as if it were proof in a case. And perhaps, in some way, it was, because when someone builds their image on deception, every moment becomes a clue. Every detail becomes a thread to pull. Meanwhile, Cody struggled more than he let on. His pride, his identity, his authority, it had all been tied to the idea that he could manage his family, that he was in control. Now, that illusion was gone too. The man who had stood by Robyn's every utterance, who had put her on a pedestal above the rest, was being confronted with the fact that he had been deceived. Not once, not in small things, but in a manner that rewrote the entire story of their lives. He had battled a dream while the reality lay sequestered in bank accounts, earning interest, taunting the rest of them who had gotten by. Christine's children also were grown enough to comprehend. They had endured the hardships. They had witnessed the fights, noticed the sacrifices, borne the pressure of financial hardship. And now, discovering that all of it might have been otherwise, that money had been present the whole time, but inaccessible, it left them furious, bewildered, betrayed. Christine tried as hard as she could to insulate them from the turmoil, but she also knew some truths could not be cushioned. They needed to know what betrayal felt like, and too often, it felt like the person they used to consider family. Robyn's fantasy fell apart further when business associates started to step back. Deals that previously came so effortlessly now evaporated. Facades that formerly inspired sympathy now inspire scorn. Each time she appeared before a camera, the questions towered above the picture that she attempted to project. Where did the money go? Why was it concealed? Do you know what you were going to do with it? No response felt adequate. The more she talked, the more her web ensnared her. Christine, meanwhile, was in a strange place, admired, respected, even feted. For years she'd been eclipsed, taken for granted, invisible in a family built around Robyn's requirements. But now everyone was hearing her, affirming her, repeating what she knew all along. It was exhilarating, but daunting. She reminded herself over and over again. This was not about fame. This was not about revenge. This was about truth. And truth had to be her guide. The most chilling aspect of it all was how avoidable it was. Robyn could have been honest. She could have been transparent. She could have sat down with the family and told them about the money. Let them see the accounts. Told them why she'd done it. Perhaps they would not have understood. Perhaps there would have still been resentment. But at least there would have been trust. And instead, she chose silence. And in that silence, there were volumes said that no words ever could. Christine could not help but think about the years she wasted second, guessing herself, questioning whether she was too suspicious, too critical, too judgmental of Robyn. She recalled the moments Cody would brush her worries aside, say she was imagining things, convince her that she was being unreasonable, and now, to have it all confirmed. It was vindicating and heartbreaking. Vindicating because she knew she hadn't been mistaken. Heartbreaking because it meant that all the doubts, all the sleepless nights, had been justified. But the tale was not yet done. The $12 million reality wasn't merely a revelation. It was an introduction. It was the tinder that lit a larger flame, one that now threatened to burn up all Robyn had created. All Cody had guarded. Everything the family once was. The fantasy had dissipated, but the repercussions were only just starting. The $12 million weight hung in every word, every glance, every uncomfortable silence between two. Long pauses among the family. Christine had opened something that could not be undone, not out of a desire for revenge, but because she had opted for truth. And once transparency opens like floodwaters, it flows everywhere, revealing what had been hidden behind coats of well-crafted smiles and scripted truth. Robyn's nights were unsettled. Sleep would be fitful and interrupted by jolts of fear. She would lie awake in bed, holding her phone, scrolling endlessly through posts, dissecting her life beyond her control. Hashtags stamped her as a fake. Fan accounts that once worshipped her went cold. Questioning every action, each time she reloaded the page, there was a new thread, a new accusation, a new speculation. It was no longer about the money. It was about character, about trust, and whether or not Robyn had ever been who she said she was. Cody felt it too. Once the proud patriarch, the man who claimed to have the answers, he now found himself withdrawing from the light. All the interview requests, all the press queries, all the communications from producers, each of them bore the same mandate: account for the $12 million. But what could he do? Say that he had not known? Say the wife he had fought so hard for had betrayed him? To do so was to acknowledge weakness, to acknowledge betrayal, and Cody's ego had been constructed upon the illusion that he could never be caught off guard. Tension swelled in the house like smoke. Janelle, the practical one who had always boasted of being a pragmatic person, could hardly keep herself from fuming. She retraced in her head all those times she had sat at the kitchen table, going through bills, figuring out ways to stretch that last dollar, wondering if the children would have enough for school outings or orthodontia. And it had been all there, money aunt. Pie in the sky, money all this time, hidden away, unspent. She couldn't look at Robyn without feeling a surge of bitterness that burned deeper with each passing day. Meri's reaction was different, more restrained on the surface, but no less devastating. She had lived for years with distance, with rejection, with a gnawing sense that she was always the expendable one. And now, learning about Robyn's hidden wealth, she realized just how expendable she had truly been. As she struggled against loneliness, Robyn had secretly established her own safety net. It wasn't betrayal so much as it was validation that her position hadn't ever mattered. That dawning shattered something within her that could never be mended. Christine, on the other hand, was not rejoicing. Everyone expected her to feel victorious, vindicated. But what she was really feeling was tired. Truth cost something, and she was paying the bill every day. Reporters camped outside her block. Neighbors whispered behind her back. Even at the grocery store, strangers stopped her and thanked her for revealing what they perceived as the ultimate deception. Christine smiled graciously, but inside she yearned for normalcy. For quiet, for the possibility of living without every step being analyzed in the public square. Her kids, though, couldn't escape the ripple effects. At school, they trailed behind them in whispers. That is Christine's child. That is the one whose stepmom stashed millions. Some of their classmates offered kindness, but others made fun or gossiped, based on whatever they had read on the internet. Christine tried her hardest to protect them, but she realized she couldn't delete what was already on the internet. The weight of the $12 million wasn't hers alone. It was her children's too. As months became weeks, the damage grew. Family-linked business enterprises started crumbling under pressure. Partnerships fell apart, citing reputational risk. Even the crew producing the family's program began to feel anxious, questioning whether it was worth going on, as it would be just adding fuel to a blazing fire. The fantasy that had proved so marketable, the picture of resilience, solidarity, devotion, was now spoiled beyond redemption. Robyn attempted to shape the story. She delivered tearful interviews, assuring that money had been misconstrued, that it was not selfishness but strategy. She had wanted to shield her children, to provide a future in case the family fell apart, she said. But the public wasn't convinced. Her words rang false against the stark fact. The money was stashed, and nobody else had been informed. Each explanation she offered only deepened suspicion, each tear interpreted not as sincerity, but as manipulation. Cody was with her in some of those interviews, but his demeanor gave him away. He was quieter, less energetic, less adamant in his own defense. Onlookers saw the way he sidestepped eye contact, the way his jaw clenched when questions grew too close. For the first time, people viewed not the solid front he previously had presented, but cracks in the support beam of his fidelity. In private, Cody battled feelings he hardly ever acknowledged. Shame, rage, bewilderment. How had he not known? How had he watched his other wives and kids struggle, convinced that the family was hardly making ends meet, when in reality $12 million remained untapped? Bad enough. How could he ever live with himself if he faced the possibility that Robyn never completely trusted him, either? The irony was not lost to him. He had asked for loyalty from all of them, and in the end, the one he trusted most had guarded the greatest secret of all. Christine, while exhausted by the fight, experienced moments of unanticipated strength. Support streamed in from individuals she had never laid eyes on, women who recognized in her bravery a mirror of their own struggle. Words poured into her email. "Thank you for standing up. You empowered me to end my own poison." Christine understood that the truth had potential beyond her family. It spoke to people all over the world who had lived in illusions, who had been told to doubt themselves, who had been silenced too long. But she also understood that the story wasn't finished. The money wasn't simply dollars in an account. It was choices, betrayals, priorities that could never be taken back. The $12 million wasn't merely about money. It was about what it showed: the cracks in a family that had long been disintegrating, the selfishness that had masqueraded as sacrifice, the delusion that had finally collapsed in the face of reality. And as months went by, the world started wondering, what is going to happen to them now? Was it possible for a family so torn apart ever to reconcile? Or was the $12 million the last straw? The reality that killed not only Robyn's fantasy, but the sister wives' fantasy as well. The cameras, the viewers, the pundits, all waited. But within the family, the silence was louder than ever. The calm after the storm was false. From the outside, everything looked as if they had withdrawn, that things might be falling into a new, tenuous normal. But inside, the atmosphere seethed with unspoken words, with questions nobody dared speak aloud, with anger that fueled the longer it was left unsaid. The $12 million secret hadn't only revealed Robyn. It had revealed them all. The parts they'd played, the deceptions they'd sustained, and the realities they'd denied. Christine sat at her kitchen table, late one evening, well past when her children had retired. A lone lamp sat on the table, sending a circle of light down upon a pile of papers she'd not laid a hand to all day. Bills, statements, schedules, but she was not thinking about them. She was looking at her phone, at a message she'd written and deleted a dozen times. It was a message to Robyn, one she wasn't sure she ever would send. The words were few, why? But every time she put her finger on send, it hovered there, frozen, because she already knew the answer, didn't she? Money had never simply been money here. It had been control, security, survival, and Robyn had wanted all three of them, even if it meant keeping everyone else ignorant. Robyn was meanwhile coming apart. In public, she still went through the show of tears, of confusion, of hurt. But in private, her rage burned brighter than people knew. She attributed the exposure, the humiliation, the sea of criticism to Christine. In her head, the money had belonged to her to guard, her prerogative as a mother to keep for her children's future. Christine had distorted it, turned it into an instrument, and Robyn was left feeling naked in front of the world. Cody was in the middle of them. For years, he had relied on Robyn, treated her as the favorite, trusted her more than the others. But that trust was no longer there. He couldn't shake the voice in his head that warned, "If she hid this from you, what else has she hidden?" But to say that was to say that he had been blind, that his own judgment had let him down. And Cody Brown was a man who did not admit easily to failure, so he held onto the shreds of allegiance, standing with Robyn in public even as he drowned in private uncertainty. The other wives were more vocal. Janelle, for instance, came right out and confronted Robyn. Her tone was cutting, her eyes afire as she demanded to know the things Christine was too cowardly to put in a text message. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for this family? Do you have any idea how many times I've had to tell my children we couldn't afford something? While you sat on millions, do you even feel guilty?" Robyn's responses were stammering, evasive. She'd claimed it hadn't been greed, that it'd been safety. But to Janelle, those words had been hollow. Safety for whom? Not her children. Not Meri's, not Christine's. But just for Robyn's. Meri's outburst was subdued, but no less effective. She didn't scream. She didn't blame. She just stared at Robyn, her voice shaking as she demanded, "Was I ever family to you, or was I always a placeholder?" The next silence was unbearable. Robyn attempted to say something, but nothing could be mustered. And in that silence, Meri had her answer. Outside the household, the media whirlwind persisted. Tabloids flashed headlines on their front pages. Robyn's secret fortune, sister wives' betrayal, the $12 million lie. Talk shows discussed the tale. Podcasts deconstructed it. Fans inundated social media with speculation and indignation. The story took on a life of its own from Robyn, and regardless of how many interviews she sat for, no matter how many tears she cried, the world had already concluded she was guilty of deception. The production company was also in crisis. The program, which had once thrived on the pretense of unity, now threatened to explode in the face of reality. Ratings skyrocketed at first. Scandal always attracts an audience, but behind the cameras, executives asked themselves how long the family could remain intact in front of the cameras. Would the public tire of the drama as soon as the shock value wore off? Or worse, would they turn on the program altogether, clamoring for responsibility for the years of deception? Christine, who was tired of being in the limelight, found herself in an odd place of power. She hadn't sought this, but others viewed her as the voice of truth. Offers started to come in. Book deals, speaking engagements, interviews that positioned her as the brave ex-wife, who stepped forward and revealed the deception. She grappled with accepting them. She wanted her story to be told on one level. Conversely, she did not want to become labeled by Robyn's secret, as though her whole life's value could be reduced to $12 million and betrayal. Her kids also got caught up in the crossfire. Some pleaded with her to stop, to leave it alone, to let their lives become normal again. Others urged her on, to continue speaking, to continue fighting. Christine struggled to weigh their needs against her own. But the reality was, there was no turning back. The fantasy was over, and nothing could reclaim it. For Robyn, the fantasy had been everything. It had been her shield, her defense against criticism, her excuse for decisions others didn't comprehend. And now it was lost. Every time she gazed in the mirror, she did not see the woman she wanted to present, but the one the world now perceived, selfish, manipulative, deceitful. She loathed Christine because of it. She resented Janelle for revealing the truth. She even resented Cody, in her weak moments for not defending her with the same indomitable loyalty he had previously shown. But above all, she loathed herself for not concealing the money more effectively, for not managing the narrative early enough, for not foreseeing that her fantasy would shatter. The family, once broken, was now in pieces. Meals were infrequent, gatherings tense and strained. Every discussion looped back to the same unspoken reality. $12 million had torn them apart. Not the money itself, but what it stood for. Betrayal, favoritism. Illusions shattered by the harsh light of day. And yet, amidst the devastation, there was clarity. Christine no longer questioned her choice to leave. Janelle no longer wondered if she had given enough. Meri no longer hoped that one day she would finally belong. Both of them, in their own way, were released by the truth. Agonizing though it was, it had knocked away the pretense and compelled them to see what was always there. A family founded on disproportion, on favoritism, on half-truths and violated promises. And as for Robyn, she was left with her millions, but without the delusion that had made them significant. The money would provide her with comfort, security, anonymity, but it would not purchase back trust. It would not purchase back love. It would not purchase back the family she'd professed to adore, but whose cracks she'd widened. And in her quietest hours, when the cameras had left and there was silence in the house, she understood that the $12 million hadn't guaranteed her future. It had terminated it. The world went on, and that is what it does. Other scandals took their place in the news. Other families were in the spotlight. But for the Browns, the harm was done. The $12 million reality wasn't merely a tale that destroyed Robyn's fantasy. It was the reality that destroyed them all. And though Robyn clung to her money, Christine knew one thing with absolute certainty. In the end, truth was worth more than millions because money could be hidden. But truth, once exposed, could never be buried again.